Hello and welcome to the A&P. I am Alex Johansson and my co-host Patrick McCallum. Patrick,
Hello, everyone. How are you getting on?
we're having logical discussions about the state of the world. Let's get into it, brother. Heyo, Patrick, how you doing, bud?
Not too bad, not too bad. Back for round two, as they say.
Rah, rah, rah. All right, so we have the due process lie in the Maryland Man hoax with Andrew Arthur's second arc. And we have, I believe, our producer, Doubting Thomas. Are you out there, Thomas?
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here.
Woohoo! Always good to have Doubting Thomas on the program with us. And as a producer, he will be looking things up to verify them as we go. We appreciate his effort. He is a pretty amazing fella. So we're going to get right back into this and listen to what Mr. Andrew Arthur has to say. Here we go.
And they told him, they told Judge Boasberg, you don't have jurisdiction. And they also said that review of these cases is limited. Right now, the courts are, attempting to flesh out, the parameters of what review is appropriate. Again, remember, in order to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, the president uses his foreign policy powers because he has to determine that this is a foreign group that's engaged in an invasion. So it's partially his powers as commander in chief, and it's partially his foreign policy powers.
Right. So there's in the Alien Enemies Act, it's wartime or a predatory incursion. And the the Venezuelan government under Maduro, the Tren de Aragua has been considered an arm of that government, which is part of the reason why the AEA was enacted, right? Also, there's a jurisdictional problem. Judge Boasberg doesn't have jurisdiction because this is a foreign policy thing, and it's a commander-in-chief issue, right? So the executive branch, part of their process, part of their core and plenary power is that power, right? So, right. So foreign policy and being in control of our armed forces, right? So when Judge Boasberg issues a temporary restraining order or a preliminary injunction or even a summary judgment, right? If he doesn't have appropriate venue, and in this case he doesn't have jurisdiction because it's not venued to him anyway. On top of that, go ahead.
If people are probably going to ask this in the comment, is there any court that can override that order?
If he is not elected president next time. The American people voted him in to be in charge of our foreign policy.
There's no court has the jurisdiction to override any enemy act, no?
The Alien Enemies Act is from 1798. The president of the time was John Adams, and it was to give the president a wide and sweeping power to remove wartime criminals and those who were engaging in predatory incursions into the United States, right?
Yes,
and he was granted by Article 1, the legislative branch, wide and sweeping powers to ensure that one individual, the one in charge of foreign policy, could, in quotes, turn on a dime to make these kinds of decisions, to make a proclamation, and then those who are a part of that proclamation, in this case for Tren de Aragua, it's, are you a non-citizen of the United States? Are you 14 years of age or older? Are you male? And are you in Tren de Aragua? So the due process changes in a habeas hearing, right? Habeas corpus, production of a body. So wherever that body is being detained, then that is the court that has jurisdiction as far as a habeas hearing. There is no reason that Kilmar Abrego Garcia in the Northern District of Texas should have been anywhere near a DC district court. Like, there isn't any reason for that. So it's wrong venue, it's wrong court, it's wrong everything, right? So Boasberg doesn't have the appropriate jurisdiction in the case based on venue and based on function, right? Because that's not where the body's detained. If he was detained in Washington, D.C., then yes, a habeas hearing, but that habeas hearing would have then been comprised of those four items, right? Non-American citizen, age 14, male, member of Tren de Aragua, see ya, right?
Yeah,
but the thing
so it's up, obviously people are going to ask also, it's up to the state to prove that they're members of this organization.
Right, and in 2019...
obviously produce evidence and so forth.
Well, and he had a ton of due process. In 2019, an appellate court dictated specifically that he was a member of Tren de Aragua. Right, so not only is he a member of Tren de Aragua, he meets all of the other conditions for that. But he's also under 8 USC, supposed to have been removed anyway, right? Because he went
Right.
through.
So there was evidence that he was a member.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Obviously, it's going to be witnesses, video, and so forth.
Right. There is some form of evidentiary value that indicated to the appellate court who made the ruling that he was a member of Tren de Aragua, that he was verified as a member of that organization. Right. In the criminal system, it's a gang validation process. The DOJ and all the states have those kinds of processes in place to determine who's a member of the Crips or of the Bloods or GBG.
So obviously, how do they go about that? Do they see video evidence, who you hang around with, and so forth?
Well, yeah, things like that. Plus, in prisons, it's even like they'll go into the cell and see what kinds of things you have in your cell. They don't have a 14th Amendment right to privacy while incarcerated. So correctional staff can go in and look through your things, right? So a lot of the things that go on in prison are the furtherance of criminal enterprise, right?
So obviously, when guys go to prison, they're obviously more likely, if they weren't part of a gang beforehand, they'll probably end up joining a gang in prison just to stay safe, as they say, is it?
Well, and let's say on the West Coast, right? You have Nuestra Familia, right? The northern structure, and then you have the Sareños, which are Southern Mexicans, right? So if you are Nuestra Familia, or if you're a Crip or a Blood or a Sareño, right? A lot of those gangs, 18th Street, a lot of them who on the streets would fight one another will come under either a Nuestra Familia banner or they'll come under the Sareño banner, right? And then when you go to yard program or whatever other program, like there's a big homie on the yard, right? And then big homie indicates, hey, generally it's that individual's titled Cardenal. So the individual who's the Cardenal or has the keys for the yard or the building or whatever, right, indicates action, right? Like if it's not furthering the appropriate criminal enterprise, that's why dudes just don't randomly attack other dudes, because it brings correctional staff down on them, right? But we're way off in the weeds. But there's a validation process functioning at the end of this that the Department of Justice has and all states, and it's for the safety of the inmates, right? You're not going to house certain kinds of inmates with other kinds of inmates.
So in this particular case, obviously he's going to touch upon it, the evidence that was brought against this young man.
Well, the appellate court said yes, he's a member of Tren de Aragua, and they wouldn't have just. Because there's a check and balance on that, right? So So what validated this individual as a member of Tren de Aragua, right?
Yeah.
And then for them to have made that,
that's what I'm curious to see.
Right. Yeah, there was a validation process. All right, here we go.
Those are two powers of the president that courts do not get involved in for two reasons. One, they don't have jurisdiction. Two, they don't have the competence. And that's really the issue. They want to get involved in these things. They don't really know what they're talking about.
So let's break this down, because as you've just really, really thoroughly laid out for us, sir, and I appreciate it, we've got two different laws in place here. We've got our regular immigration laws and deportation protocols that you would preside over as an immigration judge. And then you've got this Alien Enemies Act, which was employed for the TDA folks, some of the MS-13 folks as well. So let's deal with that one first, because I think it might be simpler. Is there due process in place historically in this country where if the president or the president's administration through national security says, hey, you're a member of this group that the president has determined is an enemy and should be deported under the Alien Enemies Act, what is the due process if that person says, no, I'm not a member of that group?
And that really gets to a fundamental issue, Larry, that a lot of people, soi disant experts, really get hung up on. When we talk about due process, we're talking about the due process clause of the Constitution. And, we sort of throw those two words together, but we forget about the fact that the first word is due. That adjective is there for a reason. It is the process that you are due. This law has only been invoked on 3 occasions, and they were all invoked during war, starting in 1812 and ending in World War II. Courts actually allowed a certain level, not a lot, of process to individuals who were removed, who were subject to the Alien Enemies Act in the past. When we talk about aliens generally, Larry, we refer to what's called a spectrum of rights. That spectrum of rights begins when an alien is at a port of entry or immediately crosses the border. So if a migrant crosses the Rio Grande and is caught by Border Patrol, the Supreme Court has held those aliens only have the rights that Congress has given them. Due process is whatever process in that situation Congress has said is due. That spectrum of rights then extends to people who are here unlawfully, then to people who are here on non-immigrant visas as tourists or students, and then to people who have green cards. Even green card holders don't have all the rights that citizens have under the Constitution. They don't have the same level of due process rights.
So it seems that when we opened up our borders and let tons and tons and tons of people in, there's a group of folks who would like them to have full citizenship rights. And if they have full citizenship rights, what happens is it bogs down our courts. We don't have near enough judges, and we could convene not near enough juries for these full spectrum of rights. And again, he was right. You are due X amount of process, right?
Okay.
You're based on the spectrum of where you are from criminal, legal alien up to citizen in that whole spectrum.
Right. Okay. It kind of speeds up, as you say, speeds up the court process as well.
Right,
There's
and
a lot of
functionally
resources.
removal is an administrative process. You are here, and it is outside what is appropriate. So, since you're in
You're
violation,
on past your. I'm going to use work permits because I'm familiar with that from the States.
Mhm.
Once you go past your date of leaving, you can be picked up at any time.
yeah, you can. But it's an administrative thing. It's not a criminal prosecution, although that's in violation of federal law. Functionally, administratively, you have overstayed your welcome. You are no longer welcome. It is time to go.
I've known a couple of Irish guys who overstayed their welcome, you could say, in your country. And in fairness, when they were being removed, they were given a chance to, pack up their gear. They were escorted, obviously,
Right.
and then they were brought to the airport and off you went. But it wasn't like they were just thrown in the back of a van and just fired on the plane. They were
Right.
given a lot of leeway. But
Yes.
that was mainly in Boston, New York. So obviously every area is different.
They weren't sent to the prison resort of Seacott in El Salvador, sir?
No, they were sent back to Dublin.
Oh, yeah.
But
Well, Dublin's a bit of an issue then too, isn't it? All right, let's let Mr. Arthur cook.
Okay.
So when you hear a lot of the president's opponents say, well, if Trump's doing this today, he's going to start deporting Americans tomorrow. No, he's not. He can't, because we receive the full panoply of rights that our wise founders put into place when they published the Bill of Rights in the 18th century. But every one of those aliens that I described has some level of process that's due, but it's more limited than it is for United States citizens, and it depends upon what status they have here.
Okay, so let's first begin with people who are in the country illegally. They're undocumented, right? And you were an immigration judge. Let's first define what that means, because I think people think that means you were a federal judge under the jurisdiction of Article 3 in the Constitution, and it's, your typical courtroom and all of those protocols and all those things.
That's another one. So the Article 3 court system is the only court that the Constitution, and Doubting Thomas back me up on this, the Supreme Court of the United States of America is the only Article 3 court that's listed in the Constitution. All other courts are a creation of the Article 1 legislative branch, although they work for the Article 3, right? So you have district courts and appellate courts, but you also have merit boards, and you have immigration courts and all these other things that have removed jurisdiction from the district courts, right? So all of these things that keep going to district court, unless they're a habeas hearing specifically to determine if the detention should be taking place in the first place, are out of venue or inappropriate because the district court judge does not have the appropriate jurisdiction. It's an immigration court that should be having that jurisdiction, right?
Yes, I believe so. The summary is it establishes a judicial branch of the federal government, which includes the Supreme Court and inferior courts created by Congress. That's an oversimplification. My issue with their argument is that I reject the entire premise. What he mentioned a minute ago, he knew some folks from Ireland that had overstayed their visa. that is an undocumented individual, undocumented immigrant, as they put it, because their documents have expired. The problem is that they're using this argument to lump everybody in, including the ones that have broke into the country, not just overstayed a visa or had their visa changed and it no longer applies, such as a work visa or so on. These are people that actively broke the law coming in to begin with as well. And they lump all of that in and say, oh, well, they should be provided the same protections. Well, we also have different protections for residents and different protections for citizens. And if you are residing in the country through a visa, there are specific rules that you have to follow. And they don't get the same exact protections as US citizens do, including speech laws. Those were exercised recently, and those were brought to court recently, and they lost those cases.
Well,
So,
they don't have the freedom. Sorry, Thomas, cutting across you here.
Yep.
So they don't have freedom of speech.
so those are rights afforded to citizens. The issue is
Okay.
that there are specific reprimands that can be placed on visas. It happens with every country. Ours are different than most other countries. Like, I visited a lot of countries, and when I go there, they say, okay, are you bringing a certain amount of money? Do you have insurance? Those sort of things, and you can't lie about that, right? So when you come to the United States, there are certain things where they're like, okay, you're not allowed to cause interruptions via public protest, by blocking roads, things like that. They'll list very specific things.
That's
Right.
very
Where-
unusual because just thinking back on Stephen Crowder, for instance.
Yeah.
He's a Canadian citizen and he's openly been open.
No, he's a U.S. citizen and was raised in
Yes,
Canada.
but when he started off, he was a Canadian citizen and he started his career.
I don't remember
Yeah.
the exact,
Yes,
but I
he was very
believe
proud of that. I do remember him actually being very proud of the fact when
Yeah.
he became a US citizen.
So it
Wasn't he?
also has to do with the inciting
Couple years
kind
ago.
of speech. So if you
Yeah,
are from
yeah.
a place where we're not friends with your country generally, but you're here and then you want to speak in a seditious fashion, the First Amendment right to free speech does not extend to you being on a student visa, which is some of the issues they're having with some of the colleges in the United States. And Harvard's running into that issue where they have almost 20% of their student body is from outside of the country, right? So
Yeah,
it's-
it
it's-
also has, it also has to do with two major laws involving anti-communism laws and anti-propaganda laws that we have specifically in the country, which again don't apply to citizens because they have the free speech, but these other individuals can't come in and say, hey, I visited the United States and I'm going to lie about this. There was a case recently about a BBC journalist getting deported for joining in on the Turkey protests and lying about the Turkish protests and so on. Like there have been cases that are tried. It's really rare though. Generally, it's sort of an overlooked thing where they go,
Yeah.
okay, yes, you don't have freedom of speech here in the same way that a citizen does, but you went to this protest. We're just going to sort of roll our eyes and tell you, please don't do that again.
It's normally slapping the wrist, so I presume, with it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's more like a
Yeah.
request. It's like, please don't do that again. That is an exceeding privilege outside of the visa we provided for you to visit our country. Right?
Okay.
You're not allowed to come here and say, hey, I'm going to promote communism and I'm going to support it, and say that your representatives are evil for not supporting it.
And
That's
has
what
this been enacted the last couple of years, or is it only a recent development?
it has been enacted occasionally throughout the years. It's just not a prominent thing. And a lot of individuals that do it, like journalists, generally don't break those bounds. They generally don't want to get removed because it normally means you can't come back. Like they're going to reject your visa indefinitely at that point. But again, it's not like the SWAT team shows up at your house at night. They show up, they say, hey, you broke this rule. We're going to ask you to please leave. Here's a plane ticket. We're paid.
Yeah.
It's paid for. Just get on the plane and leave, or else we have to come back and do something about it. You broke our rules.
right. All right. Let's
Okay.
let him cook.
Is that the same thing, or is an immigration judge a different kind of judge in a different kind of courtroom?
It's a very different kind of judge, Larry. The definition of immigration judge in the Immigration and Nationality Act is a lawyer in the Department of Justice. And, when I was an immigration judge, I had a black robe. I, sat on a bench, up on a dais. I had a big seal behind me and an American flag. But I was really just an administrative judge, and the lowest level of administrative judge that we have in our federal system. It's important to note the fact that, when we think about adjudications at the federal level, we think about the Article 3 courts you just talked about. Most of the adjudications that take place at the federal level actually take place at the administrative level.
Hmm.
You know,
So like I was saying before, it's an administrative process.
Okay.
agencies themselves
Yes.
make determinations. Boards of contract appeals, which every department has, make decisions involving, millions, billions of dollars every year. A lot of that stuff, a lot of the decisions, most of the decisions made in the federal government are made at that administrative level. And that's true in immigration as well.
Okay.
So yes, the authority to interpret the laws of the United States, the immigration laws, and to apply them belongs to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi can't hear 4 million cases.
Right.
So she has delegated her authority down to immigration judges to make that determination for her. From there, there's an appeal to an administrative appellate body called the Board of Immigration Appeals. Again, the BIA, as it's known, are also, employing Attorney General Bondi's authority. Finally, Attorney General Bondi.
And the BIA is still also an administrative function. That even that appellate process is that.
All right. There's okay.
Right. So it's administrative,
Right.
administrative, and then he's going to talk about the next one up.
Bondi
Oh.
ultimately has that authority for herself. She can delegate it, but she ultimately retains it, and she can issue decisions herself if she wants to. And that's how that system works. Larry.
So when you see senators and congressmen claiming that illegal immigrants who are facing deportation or who have been deported have been denied their due process, and yet the track record shows that they've had multiple appearances before immigration judges, and immigration judges have issued deportation orders, is it accurate to say that they haven't received due process? Because I'm told now, first it was about a Maryland man and he's a father and he's innocent and he's, Mr. Abrego Garcia. But now we find out there's a whole lot of paperwork showing that he did have days in front of immigration judges. He did have appeals. That is due process, isn't it?
That's the essence of due process. It's the essence of due process in our system. And the courts have, regularly upheld, that immigration court to BIA system. In fact, Larry, generally in, the immigration enforcement system, we jump over the district courts. If you are an alien who's been ordered removed and the Board of Immigration Appeals has, sustained an immigration judge's order, you have to ask the circuit court to take your case. You don't get an automatic appeal.
So if the administrative function fails in some fashion, from your perspective, you can appeal it to a district court. But until it's
Okay.
gone through the administrative, right, immigration, and then the BIA, the district or circuit court doesn't have to take your case. They can say, no, the BIA is good, they're correct, and then, yes, you are leaving, right? So the circuit
Okay.
court has to pick it up. But until you go through the administrative process, the district court doesn't have jurisdiction, right?
They don't have jurisdiction. Okay. What would
It's
they?
discretionary on the part of
Okay. Just he's about to say it there. It's up to it's up to discretion there. That's very interesting. So when they're on the news, they're about rights of appeal and all this. They're just speaking out of their hat.
Pretty much, because if the administrative function of the immigration judge, followed by that appellate process, also administrative, then you can appeal it to a district court, right?
Okay.
And he said circuit court, so it's a district court. It's called a circuit court, right?
Okay.
At that point, if the judge or an en banc panel takes it, then they take it. If they don't, then the decision of the administrative court and the BIA, who's made a determination that you are to be deported, that stands, right?
Okay. So obviously all these steps were followed in this particular case, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
circuit court judges whether or not you're even going to get an appeal. Much like, as we think of with the Supreme Court, you file a petition for writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court could say no for any reason that it wants.
So writ of certiorari is how you can get your case to the Supreme Court to try and get it docketed. But
Okay.
the Supreme Court can say, no, we deny your writ of certiorari. Like
Okay.
there's already precedent, and here's the precedent. So we don't need to make a ruling because a ruling has already been made, or we just don't want to. We're not going to. We're gonna let the
Okay.
appellate court over the
Do you-
circuit
do
court.
you-
Go ahead.
Basically, we're leaving it to the lower courts to handle their business.
Yeah, it's already been done, or there's already relevant case law, or it's blindingly obvious, right? Like, this is the way that it is, and it's functionally specious. So with that writ of certiorari denied, then the appellate court's decision will stand. And they can then attempt to go for an en banc of a smaller amount, or an en banc of the entirety of, say, the 4th district or whatever.
Yeah,
right? They can try
the reason why the reason I'm asking all these questions is I presume they're going to come up in the comments. So I said we just nip it in the bud before they're asked.
Right. Well, the questions will be asked, and we'll be more than happy to go over it and figure it out together. Like, this is important stuff. Like, why these things are breaking down the way they are, and why there's accusations of a lack of due process when the due process has been followed. Doubting Thomas has educated me.
And then just saying, our immigration process is kind of a bit more straightforward, really.
Well,
in a lot of ways, it's just under resourced, but it's very straightforward once it gets rolling.
Ours is fairly straightforward too, until someone says, "Well, they're not getting this," and then the court of public opinion is like, "Then, well, they're not getting this." Well, no, these things have been followed. This gentleman worked in that space. He knows. He says, "Yes, it has been followed. All of the steps were taken." But then when you get, go ahead, Thomas.
The issue is that there's a lot of leeway. The American judicial system and the American executive branch hasn't really cracked down on it, and there's a historical precedence of them saying, "Oh yeah, just come on and we'll let you do whatever you want. We're not going to prosecute. We're not going to do this." It's just not within our policy range to do so. So we've got a limited amount of manpower. We're not going to really go after it. Legally speaking, though, it is pretty straightforward.
Okay. Obviously, as I understand it, the simple reason why this hasn't been done sooner is basically down to manpower and not the will not to do it. Am I reading that right?
The will
not to do it. Yeah.
Right. Yes. The will of the people is not to until very recently. And now people are real excited about it. So
okay.
Well, same is true in the immigration court system. 99% of all immigration adjudications take place in the administrative system I've just described, and courts have regularly said that's due process as far as the Constitution is concerned.
And it may be confusing for people because we know as U.S. citizens, we have a different type of due process, but that's, as you just laid out, due to us because we're U.S. citizens, unlike someone who came into the country, admittedly illegally, even if they've been here 10 or 15 years. Does the length of time you're in the country have a bearing on whether you're given more due process or not?
That's one of those questions that the courts have never answered. It does appear that it will have some bearing as you stay here. And this is one of the biggest issues with what the Biden administration did, not so much at the border, but in the interior of the United States. The longer that you stay here and the more equities that you build up in this country, putatively, the amount of process that you are due increases. Courts have never really fleshed this out because honestly, this has never really been that big an issue in the past. It's only when the federal courts start interposing themselves into that system that has existed since the 1940s. And start looking at these things and become immigration experts, again self-described, that we really get into issues with any of this. So yeah, that's putatively they do have more authority. We definitely give them, if it's discretionary relief, we give them more discretion. But it's sort of a fine line between discretion and process in that instance.
I got to think for you watching these cable news shows and have these self-described experts on there getting everything wrong. It's got to be like a former NFL quarterback watching a game on Sunday and the commentators are just completely out to lunch and don't know what it's like to play on the field. You're yelling back at CNN on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, and that is exactly the way.
Armchair lawyers, is that what they call them?
Well, a lot of it has to do with anybody who has professional acumen at something. If someone starts talking like out of their neck, you're like, well, you don't know anything about that. And when you try and educate them, then they get emotionally invested. You're like, I'm just trying to help you out. Right. But a lot of these people who are saying wrong things have really, really big voices, and they sway a large group of people to think a thing that is in fact not happening is happening, or there's some error in process where there isn't an error in process. Right. So then everybody gets real excited.
Otherwise, or they're just speaking in bad faith, maybe. There's always
Well,
that
yeah. Well,
possibility.
obviously, there's bad faith actors. They
Yes.
have an agenda of whatever sort, on whatever team you play for. All these teams have their agendas, right?
Yeah, they all do. Yeah.
Like the
Wow.
people before Profit, they have an agenda too. I remember them.
I have a feeling one of these days you're going to join them.
Bumped your head. I'd have to become an Irish citizen first, and I don't think they want me, bud.
I don't believe in that kind of thing.
Way that this
They're
goes. And,
open.
you know, I hear people say just, you know, outrageous things, outrageously wrong things. And, you know, at least I have the benefit of, you know, working for the Center for Immigration Studies, doing interviews like this, writing a blog every day. So I can vent my spleen about everything that's
Yes.
wrong in this. But, you know, it is a rich thing. But, you know, again, I do have this experience and, you know, I do break it down for people so that they can understand it. I just wish that CNN, MSNBC, NPR would, you know, take a look at my blog from time to time and sort it out.
You and me both. We spent a lot of time on this program wishing that they could all be better. But we're doing a deep dive here if you're just joining the live stream on immigration, immigration law, deportation law, protocols, due process, and national security. This is Andrew Arthur. He's a resident fellow in law and policy at Center for Immigration Studies with a very long history in this field. In fact, I'd like to go back in history for a second now, if you don't mind, because we did draw this distinction between INS, that's what we all grew up hearing, INS, Immigration Naturalization Services. After 9/11, a lot of these organizations and agencies in the federal government were reorganized and put under the umbrella of Department of Homeland Security. There was a reason.
Hey, Thomas, were they restructured because of the Patriot Act, or was there something else going on with that?
Look into that.
All right.
For that. Our porous border was seen as one of the vulnerabilities that our nation had to fix so that we wouldn't have another 9/11. In fact, if I remember right, a good chunk of the terrorists, if not all of them, that committed the 9/11 atrocities had overstayed their visas or had entered the country illegally. So, Mr. Arthur, since you sort of went
Yeah, I
through
remember
that
that report
process
actually
and went
myself.
through that
Go ahead.
I remember the 9/11 report actually. All these guys are either, most of them overstayed their visas. A lot of them just hopped on a plane, flew in as tourists, and
Yep.
permanently stayed. Is that the word I could use?
Right to the end. Yep.
Yes, right to the yeah. No, but no, I better not make any comments. But no, he's right. A very, very poor sport. I remember the 9/11 report came out.
Well,
There was a
Ireland's
failure
got.
across the board.
Doesn't Ireland have much the same issue with they get to Northern Ireland and
Well,
then just walk south?
you know, our poorest border is with Northern Ireland, in Ireland and the UK at the moment.
Right. They land in
And they move-
Belfast and then just head on south,
and
right?
then the British government ship them down here, which is always great fun. Because we are the nearest EU country. Well, there's also France, but the French have only a couple of points of entry from Britain to France, so they're able to show that better. Where we have a big open border in Northern Ireland.
I have
Cool.
listed that there for you.
Go ahead.
I have listed that there for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Here we go.
transition and saw the re-emphasis on national security tied directly to our border security and immigration and deportation policies. Please give me your perspective about our vulnerabilities right now, how we've sort of lost the plot in terms of why this is such an essential part of our security.
No, you know, very quickly, there were 19 hijackers on September 11th. There was a 20th one involved as well, and various, you know, individuals, you know, who were tangentially related. And in the wake of the September 11th attacks, the 9/11 Commission, which was, you know, bipartisan, convened by President Bush, looked at all the vulnerabilities that, you know, we had. And, you know, Congress passed a number of laws to implement those, you know, to implement changes to plug those vulnerabilities. You know, starting with the USA Patriot Act, which a lot of people don't like, but, you know, I wrote the parts that people do like. You know, up through the
Appreciate it.
Homeland Security Act, the Intelligence Reform Act of 2004, and the Real ID Act of 2005, which is coming due 20 years too late. But each one of those things was implemented in response to an actual finding of the 9/11 Commission. There was a vulnerability that allowed these people to live, move around, and work in the United States.
All right, Thomas, you said there was a connection there, bud?
Yes. So looking over the, just going to use the acronym here so it's a little easier. The IIRIRA, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, they have been criticized for, quote, eliminating due process from the overwhelming majority of removal cases and curtailing equitable relief from removal, basically going after illegal immigrants and essentially using the Patriot Act to spy on them, to look for the loopholes, look for the people that might be enemies of the United States of America, those sorts of things. That is essentially the connection that has been made, and whether these charges and whether this lawfare has been used appropriately or not, whether it was Anti-Drug Abuse Act, a lot of other things that are connected to it, but this was the pretense they were able to then use to say, hey, we need to connect the Patriot Act to this. We need to be able to look through these people's information. We need to be able to keep track of them, so on and so on, and have more options for removing illegal immigrants and more options for researching why they're here and send that to the NSA.
Got it. So it's a search for sedition, but they feel that it may be at its core either against the Constitution or just on its face illegal, right?
It does follow due process. It is its own program. It does help eliminate certain loopholes. The question I think that comes into play is, does this negatively affect citizens, not just go after people that have broken the law?
Got it. So is it a violation of our civil rights that others are being searched for sedition or searched out for possible sedition?
For breaking the law, it's hard to say sedition's the exact reason. I mean, this is another tool in the belt to go after things like spying, but it's how it's used, I think, is the concern.
Okay.
So does it have a negative impact on the citizenry of the United States, or is that not yet, or is that yet to be determined? Or is
The Patriot Act?
If I had to, the Patriot Act definitely, right? No,
Yes,
no, I don't think anyone's got a dispute about whether it negatively impacts the United States citizens. I don't think there's any dispute there.
Yeah.
There's no dispute there. Where it becomes an issue is, here's an example, and I have to state that this is my opinion.
Okay.
The way in which they use it to say blacklist people from being able to get plane tickets or use public transportation.
Oh,
those sort of
the
things.
Silent Skies thing that affected Tulsi Gabbard?
Exactly. So when it comes to situations like that, where there is a limited venue for disputing that goes against constitutional rights for citizens who have a right to redress grievances to the U.S. government, that sort of thing. That's my opinion. That, and I guess I have to say that's my opinion. In my opinion, that does negatively affect U.S. citizens outside of the scope.
Paddy, do you remember the redressing issue we were talking about with Section 230, where Tim Pool was talking about that?
Yes, so, I do remember that, yeah.
Right, so that's a redressing issue where no one was listening, no court would hear, wouldn't even put it on the docket, right? This is the same kind of thing. So if American citizens don't get, in quotes, their day in court, then their rights have been violated, right? And my issue with the other one was that that's a right delayed. Right? Seriously delayed. But if the Supreme Court doesn't hear it, then at that point he has been completely cut off from his ability to redress a grievance. So, all right, let's get back into this.
One of the key findings in the 9/11 Commission, and this is, on page 388, I think, is in the years leading up to September 11th, border security was not considered to be an aspect of national security. There were debates about how many or how few aliens should come into the United States and about drug smuggling, but no emphasis whatsoever on the individuals who would come here to harm the national security.
Yeah, if I may, because I remember I lived in California at the time, and our border security and our immigration policy was almost always discussed within the context of the economy, within jobs and economic issues, sometimes some cultural and language issues about how an influx of immigrants from various parts of the country might affect a community, but it was very rarely spoken in through the context of national security and the sort of protection of our homeland.
Yeah, no, and the 9/11 Commission specifically, was impaneled and made those recommendations, and Congress acted on a bipartisan basis to plug the gaps that the 9/11 Commission had identified. which is why when people get, come here legally, when they go to the consulate, when they get a visa, they have to show that they don't have a criminal history abroad. They have to show that they aren't members of groups dedicated to the overthrow of the United States or to groups that would adversely affect the foreign policy of the United States. One of the things that I've discovered, Larry, in the course of my, investigation of the Biden administration over the last 4 years, is that many of the people who were making those decisions were teenagers, if they weren't in diapers, at the time that the 9/11 Commission issued its report and that the 9/11 Commission attacks happened, which is probably why, to the degree that they ever had any use for the 9/11 Commission report, it was as a doorstop to hold open their door in the executive office building. So, all of the lessons that we had learned on September 11th, all of the laws that we had implemented were basically ignored. We opened, we had, secured the front door, and then the Biden administration opened the back door. When people enter illegally, when they, cross the border illegally, or they show up at the ports without proper documents, we don't know anything about them. They've skipped over that vetting system abroad. And in the case of a country like Venezuela, we're never going to know anything about those individuals because Nicolas Maduro hates the United States and would love to overthrow it. So they're not going to tell us, who's a criminal, who's a TDA member, who's a child molester, who served time in a mental institution. When Donald Trump was on the campaign trail, he was derided for saying that Maduro opened his jails and his mental institutions.
Which has now come to the fore as a fact. He literally dumped some of the worst people in his country in our country. All I had to do was get them north of the Darien Gap, and then once you get north of the Darien Gap, that's a wrap. Like, they're getting in there, right? Because there wasn't anybody stopping. Once they got to the border and up and in.
Obviously, there's documental evidence for all this, isn't there?
Yes. Well, and he's the one who documented a lot of it. This individual here, Mr. Andrew Arthur, he's like, here are the facts of the thing. And we'll put a link to him and his center as well in the video comments, because it's super. Yeah, like, it's not a joke. Like, we are fully aware that Maduro did that, right, and encouraged.
And what was his end goal? Just to
predatory inclusion.
Dump his problem somewhere else.
No, it's a predatory incursion. If you send the worst of your people somewhere, they're going to cause havoc, and the more havoc they cause, that is functionally a predatory incursion. Right, which was the cause of the Alien Enemies Act proclamation being put down, and then the subsequent follow-ons from the administration. So here we go.
Right.
And you would see a lot of fact checks. There's no facts that support that. Reporters are supposed to actually go figure out what's happening, not fact check Donald Trump. But that's how they spent most of that time.
Yeah.
And explains why we're in the situation we're in today.
Well, and the sources oftentimes on those fact checks were the Biden administration saying, oh, no, that's not true. But it is true. And by the way, let's talk about this for a second, because we have learned that there were plenty of people led into this country under those auspices that you just described. But is it true that we, in fact, deliberately, proactively flew people into this country? It's not like they came to our border and we just let them in. We actually, the U.S. government under the Biden administration, went out of our way to fly people in from some of these countries?
Fly them in at a rate of up to 30,000 people per month from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti.
Venezuela. Wait. I'm sorry. You just said that the president of Venezuela hates America. We do not, and we have this adversarial relationship with them. In fact, I think the Biden administration's official position was that he was not officially the president, that it was a rigged election. Why on earth would we proactively bring in thousands of people from a country where the leader hates us? What? That's a suicide.
Thousands of people a month. That's not just a few thousand people came into the country. That's thousands a month. The highest of which I believe was close to 250,000 in a month.
And how did they get in? Was it by boat, plane, or combination of everything?
All of it, but mainly they just walked north across the border into Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California.
I'll post up on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
and
I just posted up on that about the intelligence report about them crossing the U.S.-Mexican border.
Now. Yes.
Yep, 100%. So the issue there being that they were not sent back. Like the border was completely opened. So there's no way to regulate their entry. We can't know anything about them. And now we have millions of people in our country and we have no idea where they are, where they went, what they're doing, right? And it was a completely
And
preventable process.
yes, I'll say I'm just reading it here now. Okay, a lot of them came through the Mexican-U.S. border by the looks of this report here. Okay.
Yeah, it's even more insidious than that in
Yeah, but
some
I'm just
ways.
wondering. Obviously, the Mexican authorities didn't stop them from winning
That's where
either.
it gets more insidious. So the issue with how they were introduced in the United States is that they're given information, they're given pamphlets, they're given lawyers paid for by the taxpayers and says, hey, here's how you're going to get in. Here's a pamphlet. Here's what you tell border security. And a lot
Okay.
of the cases, not all, but a lot of the cases were being reviewed as political prosecution. There have been a number of situations where an individual could be brought in for political prosecution. The most recent example is the South Africans, where they're brought in because they're being politically prosecuted and killed on a regular basis because of a political movement that says, hey, we need to harm these individuals. We need to
ethnic cleansing. For sure.
I was trying to avoid the word, but yeah, that's basically what it is. So they're coming into the United States and they're saying, oh, I'm a political prisoner. I'm a political prisoner, and you have to let me in. And because of the policies that were at hand, they were told, let everybody in that makes X, Y, and Z claims. That's why I made that post there. Alexander Mayorkas, who's a known communist supporter, who was head of that security situation, was told about this. He was not only informed, there was an official letter written where they said, hey, we have a situation where violent criminals from countries like Venezuela are coming over. This needs to be dealt with. And he says, oh, don't worry, we'll investigate it. And it never got taken care of.
Okay. Very, very. Wow.
Right. And we also have it coming from the northern border as well. So those that couldn't
Oh,
get in
from
through the
Canada?
southern border. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The incursion rate
So
from Canada is pretty horrible too.
okay, just let me get this right. So they go from Venezuela to Canada and then into the US?
Well, so what
No.
happens is they get north of the Darien Gap, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. And then once they get north of the
Okay.
Darien Gap, they go through Central America, they get into Mexico, and they're pretty much just pushed up to the northern border. Like once you get to the south
Right.
end of Mexico, like you pretty much get just rushed up to the top so you can get the hell
Yeah,
out
you
of
can.
Mexico.
Yeah, just skip over the border, as they say, into Texas and so on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they want you out of Mexico. So there were
Okay.
huge caravans just heading north through Mexico to get to the United States. Massive,
Okay.
thousands upon thousands of people literally just
And
northbound.
where does the Canadian angle come in?
If you can't get in through Mexico, but you can get to Canada, then you just come south. However it
Right.
is you
So
get
they
to
will.
Canada, however it is you got to
Oh,
Canada, however it is you got to
okay.
Mexico. I'm not sure of exactly how it is they get there, but they do get there. And when they get there,
Okay.
or into Canada, they just go south into Montana, into Idaho, into Washington State, into wherever on the East Coast, Massachusetts, New York, Michigan,
Okay.
Wisconsin, whatever. Like they just
I
come
know.
south.
I know most immigration that's been bussed into New York is coming from the southern border.
Right. But there's still a lot that comes from the Canadian side as well.
Okay.
That's a massive, that border is way more massive than the border on the south side. Way more massive.
Yeah, because I
And
know I've
much
known
less
a lot of
monitored.
people who've lived and worked in Canada, and to be honest with the Canadians, they're not usually that tolerant of immigrants. I'm just surprised that there's so many getting through Canada, to be honest.
But it's a bigger, wider border. It's way easier.
Okay.
It's way more permeable.
Well, I obviously understand that the Canadians are being blamed for lots of things at the moment, but I don't think
Right.
that is one of them, I would say.
Well, we blame him for Trudeau and now Carney. So there's some blame to be had. Here we go.
Side mission.
Do you want to know the real answer, Larry? I'll tell you. Joe Biden had a significant political issue. He had a number of them leading up to the 2024 election. And that was, thanks to people like you, people like me, the American people were finally waking up to the fact that millions of unvetted aliens were pouring into the United States, that they were crossing illegally, and that they were overwhelming Border Patrol agents. So in order to allow those would-be illegal migrants to bypass that system so they wouldn't show up in those Border Patrol apprehension stats that were so awful for the president every month. He allowed, again, 30,000 nationals of that country per month to fly directly into the United States. They flew into domestic airports or, international airports in the United States. And for that reason, they didn't show up in the Border Patrol apprehension statistics, each month. 360,000 people.
So not only let them in, flew them in to our international airports to then be dispersed amongst our citizenry. That is.
So obviously, it's an international airport. You just land and off you go.
Yep, off you go. Welcome to the United States.
But I presume if I got an international flight from my country to your country and got off, I could just walk in as well, could I?
No, absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. No, you go through customs and they'd be like, you can't be here. You need to hop on the plane to get on back to Dublin there. But
how did these people get past the customs zone to these international airports?
They were told to allow them through. They weren't. They didn't go through formal customs, right?
Okay.
They hit him with the old Dugan side door, right? Old side door Dugan. They hit him with one of those. Like, okay, here you go. And then once they get outside the airport, they're bused to wherever. And generally, they're bused to communities where they can cause issues with gerrymandering and with representative amounts. So in the United States, our representation is based on population for the House of Representatives as well as for the Electoral College.
Right,
we talked about that, right?
Before, yeah.
So then if I blow up a certain place with, say, 30 or 40 or 50,000 people, I can change demographics. I can actually cause there to be more representative districts in certain places.
Oh, yeah, especially in a two-party system like yourselves.
Right. So
a couple of percent either way can swing any election.
Right. And California is a huge example of this. We have a massive amount of representatives. And if we can expand the amount of people in our state, right? And they kind of needed to do that because we're losing thousands upon thousands a month, right? So the population in California is close to 40 billion. 40 million, which is roughly the same population as Canada, right? So we have a massive amount of people. So we have a massive amount of representation in the House of Representatives. The only problem
I do see these videos right on YouTube where especially a lot of YouTubers from all, by the way, before anyone jumps on, from all across the divide on YouTube, not just left or right, but across both divides, are just exiting out of California down to mainly tax reasons is probably the biggest one I've heard.
Right. Well, we have a 14%
Second is
state
crime.
tax.
Yeah, crime is the big one. Homelessness is another one I was thinking.
Right. Well, the problem is now we have over half the homeless population of the United States is in California, and all of those bodies, the homeless bodies, as well as those of illegals, since they're physical bodies that are there, they go into the count of people, right? But the only way to keep our numbers up is to get people in. And if citizens and residents of the state of California move out, they really like Texas for some reason. I guess they like freedom. Then we have to keep our numbers up somehow. And we have to get more bodies into those communities. And
I noticed that with a lot of YouTubers. A lot of them are heading to Texas.
Yes.
A lot of them are heading to Washington for whatever reason.
That's very strange.
Yeah, a lot of them. Actually, the funny enough is the few I'm thinking of that headed to Washington are very, very is left leaning the word I can use? Probably. Most of them are left leaning actually heading to Washington.
Yeah. Lucky them.
Well,
Actually, it's once a day like the
more than
business.
500,000 who came in under this program. But remember the point you just made. Not only does Venezuela not like us, Cuba doesn't like us, and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua don't like us. None of these people have really liked us for decades.
Right.
So we had no way
that's
of vetting
kind of a reason.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You probably shouldn't.
Let's not sugarcoat. There's a particular reason why they don't like me.
I'm not going to move someone into my house that doesn't like me.
Yes,
right?
Yes, I was about to say, yeah.
It seems like I wouldn't want to set myself up for something adversarial in my living room. It doesn't seem like a good idea.
those
Yeah.
individuals. In fact, if you go back in time, you'll see that nobody really took responsibility for this. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said, we administer the program, but we don't really adjudicate these things. CBP officers at the ports were left, with these people showing up with the paroles that USCIS had given them, and they didn't really know what to do with them. They didn't have any way to vet them. They don't have access to Venezuelan criminal databases or Chilean or Colombian ones either. Yes, I mean,
Wow.
And then
This
they
Okay.
get here, they get here and they just
That's a way different from our immigration process. When we
Well-
vet people, we
Right.
vet them normally to Interpol
Of course, right.
and
But
through the UN.
an adversarial nation isn't going to give you that information anyway.
No, that's why we in Europe, as a European country, we use Interpol.
Right.
who we
I
normally
understand
use
that. But
to
the
vet.
United States is not going to be, there isn't an Interpol in South America that's going to say,
No, there isn't.
this
Yeah.
Chilean criminal, we're going to tell you about him. And hey, no, none of that. We don't get any of that. No Venezuelan, no
Okay.
nothing. So,
And funny enough, would the CIA, would their resources be able to identify these people a lot better, I presume? all
there's
their
not
technology?
enough resources to vet 30,000 people a month that are being
there
flown
isn't,
into our
obviously.
domestic international airports. Yeah, we just don't have the
Mm.
resources for it. So the idea would have been, don't fly them in and lock the border up, right? Borders
Yes.
represent concept differences, like a difference in ideals, right? The United States has a constitution. We like our ideals, but Mexico, although it is a beautiful place in many aspects, does not have the same cultural concepts that we do. So,
No.
right? And then for sure, Venezuela and Chile and all those countries, those who are adversarial, Cuba, whatever, like they don't have our best interests at heart. So why would you want to let them into the salon, so to speak? Like there
Mm.
isn't a reason for that. That's a good reason. There isn't one where
But
safety is paramount.
It does bring up a very good point that was in the previous episode, is what you said is most immigrants that voted for Trump this election cycle voted for him because he was tough on immigration, because a lot of these people got in the right way. They
Right.
went through the work permits, they went through the process of years, spending thousands of dollars out of their own pockets, become full citizens themselves.
Right. And they're proud of
So-
it. And they should be.
Yes.
Just like if someone becomes an Irish citizen and goes through their whole process there,
Yes.
should be proud. But a lot of it has to do
Yes.
with, are they willing to assimilate into the culture? Those
Yes.
who are criminals who are coming here are not willing to assimilate.
They're not
coming
going to
here.
assimilate, no.
Yeah, it's furtherance of criminal enterprise. It's to cause and wreak havoc and to destabilize the country. If that's the goal, and if you are an arm in a predatory incursion into another country, then there's all the reason in the world to say you need to go. You need to go back to
Yes.
where you are from, and we need to streamline this process because it is unsafe
Mm.
for the citizens, right? So that's just bad all the way around.
Right, let's tear into this.
They
get here
can't
and they
really
just-
disappear.
and they never show up. And now, this is done under, first of all, the Humanitarian Parole Program. This is CHNV.
And they don't show up for their hearings that they get that are 5 years down the line. They get given a
Yeah,
piece of
we-
paper that says administratively you
we-
need to be here.
Yeah, we have had the same issues over here, actually.
I know you're familiar with.
A lot
They
of the
came
some
from
very
Cuba,
same
Haiti,
issues.
Nicaragua, Venezuela, over 500,000, over 500,000 immigrants brought in under that program. And then under the temporary protected status program, that was a lot of the Haitians, but also some other nationalities came in. Trump is now removing those temporary statuses, those temporary protections they had. And I'm seeing headlines and I'm seeing Democrats screaming that this is awful, this is terrible, you can't do this. Doesn't that whole temporary part, doesn't that mean that it's not permanent? That mean, what can't a president say, okay, you don't get that temporary protective status anymore?
So that is a foreign policy decision, right? So if Trump decides that that's the case, then that's the case. And then
Yes.
his secretaries who are in charge, Kristi Noem, I believe being the lead on that one, says, no, it is no longer in the interest of the United States for us to maintain this temporary status for you. You need to go home. You need to go away. Bye-bye now.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, this is purely discretionary on the part of the executive branch. Congress gave, then INS this authority back in the 90s with the idea that it would be temporary. Take Montserrat, for example. Montserrat, for about 6 months had temporary protected status. It's an island in the Caribbean, and they had a volcano, and that volcano wiped out about 40% of the island. So we said, if you're a native of Montserrat and you're here, you got temporary protected status for 6 months. And at the end of that 6 month period, we revoked it and nobody really complained.
Right.
When it comes to these Central American, countries and South American countries, however, they start to create their own constituencies in the United States that want that to continue. El Salvador has had temporary protected status. Remember temporary, Larry, has had temporary protected status since 2000 in response to Hurricane Mitch.
25 years since the hurricane. And they're
Wow.
using that same temporary status gained from 2000, that hurricane, to continue to maintain. And he's right. It's generating a ton of constituency issues, right? Because if I'm
Yeah.
representing a district that has 100,000 immigrants from X country, then to maintain my representative status, I'm really not going to say, all y'all need to get out because my seat is dependent upon those 100,000
Yes,
bodies
yes.
in my constituent space.
Yeah.
Right. Even if they're not voting, because they're there, they set up a constituency of their own. Right.
Yeah.
Hurricane Mitch was cleaned up 6 months later. But, 25
I'm sorry, did
years.
you just say 2000? Because it's 2025 right now, Judge. Are you said this is 25 years they've had temporary status for El Salvador?
Yeah, and, various administrations, primarily.
heck
Did
of a
someone forget to take back
Well,
that law? Did
So,
they?
when it comes
Well, it was a temporary status that was granted.
Oh, obviously, yeah.
Right.
Obviously, I'm just laughing at. He's laughing as well. That did someone just forget to, take it back?
Well, no,
Was it
but
just-
it had to be reassessed and reaffirmed. Right. There's a
Well,
process.
okay. I was just thinking, somebody obviously that was brought in and they just forgot to take it back.
No, it was reassessed and reaffirmed
Is it
multiple times.
every couple of years? Is it or?
I don't know the cycle, but I know that it has to be reassessed and reaffirmed. But I'm pretty sure they're going to go into it.
Okay.
time to re-up TPS, it's coffee rust or something. Coffee rust is literally one of the excuses that they've used for continuing temporary protected status
Oh,
for
coffee roast.
Salvadorans in the
Sorry.
United States. But you talk about the countries that have gotten TPS, temporary protected status. Venezuela was one of them. In fact, this migrant surge from Venezuela was largely triggered by the fact that Alejandro Mayorkas, the impeached Secretary of Homeland Security, in March of 2021 decided to designate Venezuela for temporary protected status. Here's the stat for you, Larry. In the years leading up to the Biden administration, about 5,000 Venezuelan nationals total were apprehended entering the United States illegally. As soon as
So that's apprehended. So if 5,000 are apprehended, then
Yeah.
a much larger percentage managed to make
Is
it
it
in.
is it 1 in 10 roughly apprehended at the border?
I don't
Did we
know
say
the
that?
statistics on it. I
Yeah.
wouldn't claim to know. But
Yeah.
obviously more than the
Yeah.
5,000 that were apprehended, right? Because the border is
Obviously,
so
yes,
porous. So
Mayorkas implemented temporary protected status, we were getting hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan nationals coming every year. In fact, when he re-implemented it, and I could explain why he re-implemented it, that's no better, but in 2024, 731,000 Venezuelans were eligible for temporary protected status in the United States. When you're talking about a population that big, it's never going to be temporary unless an administration like this one takes the steps that it did, and now it's being blocked in doing that.
it's being blocked.
Yeah.
Right. So district court judges who don't have the appropriate jurisdiction are issuing temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions. And understand, temporary restraining orders are almost impossible to counteract. Like, you can't appeal them, generally speaking, unless the
Okay.
temporary restraining order is acting like a preliminary injunction. There has to be an emergent situation. You have to approve things like, we're going to
I know
win on the
around
merits of the
this
case.
time that he's talking about with Venezuela, their entire economy just literally collapsed around that time.
But
And-
731,000 people is a district. It is a congressional district.
Oh, I understand that. I can understand why there was a surge as well at the same time.
Yep.
Amazing
But as
stuff.
you
By
said,
the
they should
way,
be well vetted if they're coming into the country.
But they weren't. They were flown in.
No.
We don't, and it's not like Venezuela's like, hey, there's some good folks here. There's a couple of bad ones. No, it's like we know nothing about any of them. Good,
I think
bad.
everyone just, everyone wanted to jump off the ship as it was sinking.
Pretty much.
just to be fair, full disclosure, I mean, I've been to Montserrat. It's right off Antigua. It's a beautiful. I mean, given the choice, I would probably go back to Montserrat after 6 months of a volcano. El Salvador, maybe at the time at least, a different situation. I want to wrap things up here with one more question. We're speaking with Andrew Arthur, doing a deep dive in immigration policies, deportation policies, the national security aspects, and most importantly, this whole due process thing we keep hearing in the news from people who don't really know what the due process is. So I want to go back to that, if I may. You were an immigration judge. This was your job. This was your life. You would have people brought into you who were apprehended in the country illegally. They made their case to you. Sometimes I'm guessing they claimed that they were eligible for amnesty, and it was your job to determine whether they should be deported. So one quick thing I want to hit on, because a lot of people say these are refugees that they want. I love hearing this all the time. They're asking for sanctuary and amnesty here in the United States because they want a better job, a better life, and to make money. Is that grounds for amnesty?
No, absolutely not. To get asylum in the United States, you have to show either past persecution or well-founded fear of future persecution on account of your race, your religion, your nationality, your membership in a particular social group, or your political opinion.
That's
It's
it.
not eligible. It's not available to people fleeing war. It's not, available to people fleeing economic privation. If that was the standard, Larry, we have the highest standard of living in the world. Everybody
Right.
would come here and everybody
Thank
would
you.
be eligible.
And you're right. Thank you. Asylum was the word I was thinking of. I was saying amnesty, but that's it. There are very, very specific statutory definitions of what makes someone eligible for asylum. And being poor and wanting to make more money here to help their family, as wonderful as that may be, and I get it, that's, we're a great country, that's not grounds for asylum. All right. So these people come into you and you're the judge and you make a determination. How many cases did you see per day? Average?
I would see 21 cases per day, and I would issue generally one or two asylum decisions every day. And I know what your next question is going to be.
So 2 out of 20 per day. Let's see. Let's do some math. So if you work 20 days a month, 12 months, 240. So 500. He gives.
Yes, we'll round up to 500.
We'll say 500.
480. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's 2 of 20. So it's 20%. That means 80% of the people that he sees have to go back to wherever.
Yeah. By the way, I think he's just about to answer that.
Yeah. Well, but just mathematically, if you work that up into the millions that have now come in, there isn't any way to adjudicate this. If one judge is only doing 20 a day, we're going to need thousands of more judges, right, to handle the bureaucratic backlog and all this administrative action that needs to take place.
Yes.
So a streamlined thing, changing due process for non-citizens is going to have to be a thing that happens, or we're going to continue to be overrun, culturally destroyed, and there's going to be more predatory incursions. There just necessarily is going to be. It's like there's a bad guy team in place in our country, and we're just like, oh, everything's okay. I don't know if it's going to be okay, but it doesn't feel okay.
Yeah.
And it's going to be how many of these people actually get granted asylum on a, over, a wide span of time, going all the way back to 2008. Only about 17% of people who were, who entered illegally ended up getting granted asylum. All of the rest of them either didn't show up for court. And keep in mind, Larry, more than a third of all people don't show up for court, or they applied and they were denied. I was in a detained court. My grant rate, according to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, was 9%. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I saw a number of criminals who just weren't eligible. But most of these Central American claims are not valid. They're just denied.
If we have 15, 20, what's your guess in terms of how many millions of cases that right now are waiting for a hearing? We should know that number, right? Shouldn't we be able to push a button and spit out the number of pending hearings?
It's just over 4 million pending hearings before
Oh, all right.
720 immigration judges.
4
Oh wow,
million. So that's 4
4 million.
million
Okay.
pending cases, which means that the number of those who shouldn't be here has got to be exponentially higher. It has to be.
Yes. Okay.
So even at 4 times, that's 16 million, and that seems a reasonable amount, right?
Yeah.
So if you
So
round
1
that,
in 4. Yeah. Okay. 1 in 4. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But and the thing is
Wow.
those court appearances are 4, 5, 6 years out. So that means
Yeah.
that they're establishing themselves here while that's going on, because they're not going to leave. They have a court date,
Yeah.
right? But
Okay.
I'm pretty sure at any point between now and when their court date is, if they get picked up, they're going to get shipped, right? They're not.
That is a normal process normally. Yes.
But yeah, it's very strange. And I don't know why people are so up in arms at it. If you're here illegally, then you should go back. If you don't go to the port of entry and you don't have the appropriate paperwork, right, then you're just stealing resources functionally.
Mm.
You're just taking from the citizens who are paying taxes and are trying to have their best life here, you know?
Yeah.
But
So
they're also,
the other numbers are not pending hearings. The other numbers are just people who are in the country illegally and they don't even have any sort of court date at this point.
that's correct. And there are also more than 1 million other cases that are over at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's the
Okay.
bad news. Can I give you some good news, Larry?
Please.
The good news is that ever since the Trump administration sealed the border, and I was down in San Diego 3 weeks ago, nobody's coming across that border. The backlog in the immigration courts has dropped. It dropped by about 100,000 cases, and that's the first time that's happened since 2008. The Donald Trump's credo is you patch the boat and then you bail the boat. In this case, the side of the boat is the border, and the water in the boat is the unauthorized population in the United States. If we simply enforce the laws, as a district court judge found when ruling in the Biden administration's favor, this system works. But the problem is that it's become a mix of political rancor and ego. And that continues. She made that determination of the Biden administration. But unfortunately, as we see from her fellow district court judges today, the political rancor and the ego continues.
Well, the system works and it may even work efficiently, but is it even possible for it to take care of the problem? The boat is patched, yes. But if going through regular due process now, as currently dictated, for the millions of backlogged asylum cases, as well as those who may be apprehended being here illegally, that you're even off the radar and they get their day in court to be able to determine whether they should be deported, how long would it reasonably take based on the current number of judges that we have?
So part of the problem is our legal system is also bearing the brunt of this, right? So illegals
Right.
that commit crimes are still using up resources. First, it's the law enforcement agent on the street. Then it's the correctional system that they go into, district attorneys, all kinds
All the
of
resources, pretty
Right.
much a lot of resources from the state.
Right.
Yes.
right, which is costing cities, counties, states, and the federal government an untold amount of billions of dollars. It's insane.
Okay.
It's insanity. That is a ton of our resources that shouldn't have gone to something like that. Something that our money, which has already been taken in taxes, is functionally being used against our will for a thing we don't want. Right? The constituency
Mm.
isn't represented appropriately when they're burning money on things that we as a people don't want. And it's the same for any constituency in any place, right?
Yes.
And I can answer that question, Larry. And this gets to Congress's responsibility. If you remember, Joe Biden, when the awful Senate border bill that nobody ever read, but everybody said was great, was going through the process when Donald Trump purportedly stopped it. Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris said Congress needs to act in order for us to get the system under control. That wasn't true. But today we do need Congress to act, and it's not by changing the laws, although there are a few things we could change. It's money. Tom Homan needs about $185 million from Congress in order to expand detention space and expand the number of judges on the bench, expand the number of ICE prosecutors, expand the number of immigration enforcement agents to actually move these people out of the United States. If you were to double the size of the immigration court, to 1,400, and you were to double the amount of bed space, it's 46,000 beds right now. If we were to double that to 92,000, most of those people, we could get those people through the process in about the same period of time I took. I would hear cases, I'd be done in sometimes cases would be done in 3 days, sometimes they'd be done in 21 days, but in no situation did it ever take 2 months or more. So when you detain people, they don't.
Once you get them in the chute, once they're detained, it's
Okay.
not that hard to process them administratively, right?
Yes.
And if there's
Well,
any
yeah,
other,
once in the pipeline, as they say.
right, once you get the pipeline going, and then it's easier to deal with them. But the problem is if they're extant and they don't come in, not much can be done, which is why Homan's got them on the streets trying to find them. And there's a lot of states that have sanctuary policies where they're just releasing them into the public as opposed to handing them over. We talked about that last episode for the first arc of this one. So we don't need to go into that again, but understand that these sanctuary spaces are not appropriately releasing them to the next authority who has jurisdiction to hold the individual, right? Some states like California, Illinois, New York are about to run into a very serious problem because Tom Homan said he's going to flood the zone. Just going to flood the zone. And probation officers.
Does he have the bodies to do it?
He said he's going to do it. So it don't have to be here and there, but he can't flood the zone everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, he just can't. I mean, he's going to do the best he can, but he doesn't have the resources. And like Mr. Arthur said here, Judge Arthur, you're going to need more resources. And the American people want this, so getting those resources shouldn't be that difficult. The problem is Congress holds the purse strings, right? And Congress now has a ton of extra money in their hand because of all the things that Doge has done to reduce repetitive, excessive, crazy spending. Things like the Social Security Administration having people who are over 200 years old or over 150 with generated. Yeah, it's really, really strange.
Obviously, it's going to take time for these agents to come online. They have to be trained and so forth.
Right. But the thing is that
at least 6 to 12 months.
Right. Well, we have a lot of agencies that shouldn't have guns. Doubting Thomas was telling me, like the ATF doesn't really need to have people with badges and guns, right?
What?
Their function is to make sure administratively certain things are happening for federal firearm licenses. Is your paperwork correct? Like there shouldn't be an armed portion of the ATF. So if you took the guns and badges from the ATF and moved them up under Tom Homan, like seriously, we have over 400 agencies.
The ATF have to seize weapons. How did they seize weapons with no guns? Just out of curiosity.
It should be up to them to say administratively, here's the problem, and then hand it to an agency that has badges and guns.
That has guns, okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, but the problem is we have over 400 agencies, and a lot of those agencies in the United States have badges and guns. They're administrative functions, and they're handed sections of functionally Article 2 authority to enforce not laws passed by Congress, but rules made by the agency.
Do you think these agents would be better off being used in a different department, like ICE, for instance?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Okay.
1,000%.
Okay.
Right? Because it seems like in the last administration, there was a lot of attacking Second Amendment rights in a very strange way, and a lot of that was through the ATF, right? But now we have the Department of Justice in support of many of these 2A cases, and we'll get into that. But just a sideline note that these agencies shouldn't have badges and guns because they're administrative in nature.
I remember after 9/11, a lot of these agencies were given extra powers as well as firearms. After 9/11.
Don't get Doubting Thomas started because we don't have another hour and a half. He will go.
They're not.
Okay.
Yeah, there he is. I knew he was going to peep up. All right.
I already threw a post up and everything about it. Yeah.
I can see it here coming up on the screen.
From across the country, I could smell the emotional investment. I was like, ooh, it's palpable. It's palpable.
I mean, the only comment I would even
Sorry, Thomas. Just to cut across you there. Just post a link here. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Do they have guns?
Yep.
Yes.
100%.
It was just one example I was trying to show that
the ATF, they're in charge of firearms. They should have firearms. I understand that.
No, they're not in charge of firearms.
That's a misnomer.
It's a big misnomer.
That's
By the way,
Yeah,
I did,
that's-
by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's just to wind up my other two guests here.
yeah.
It worked.
Little. The only thing I will state on it is that the issue is that they're under a situation where they're generating policy and enacting it as law.
Okay.
Instead of actually following, what their job is to do is to investigate things based under the law and fulfill practices that they're supposed to fulfill. They have refused to fulfill those practices.
And does the EPA have firearms? I never thought they had firearms in the States.
Right. What Alex was just saying about how all these different agencies have these sort of anti-criminal government special, what they call them, like sort of, I hate to say it's special police, but they're called special agents under their terminology.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're sent out there to basically generate warrants. They basically go to federal judges and say, "Hey, I need a warrant for this."
That's fair enough. I'm just curious.
Right, but it's not to enforce laws.
But it's not. Right, exactly.
It's because of regulations generated by a thing called the Chevron Doctrine, where agencies were given,
which has been overturned.
Yeah, which agencies have been given the ability to say, well, if this kind of thing is not legal, then 5 other things that are kind of like it are also illegal, and then we're going to generate funding by following up on these things that we have now said are against the rules. Right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just curious why that. So if you become a special agent
I would need to have a bit of time to outside the scope of the conversation. I would need to actually sit down and explain why those were established. But that is outside of the scope of their capabilities and jurisdiction. For long story short,
if I go over to the United States, and I cut down a couple of trees illegally, the environmental protection guys could turn up with guns.
No. That's depending on where you are, it could be the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission, which
or the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, which also has guns.
What? Land management have guns?
Oh, a lot of guns.
Yeah, that's there again. It would take me a whole episode to explain. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's what I'm saying. It's a little complicated.
Out of curiosity, let's narrow it down. Is there any federal agency that does not have firearms?
Yes,
the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Who?
The Federal Reserve doesn't have guns.
What, the Federal Reserve?
Yeah.
Okay. But wait a minute. They're the guys who make the money, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, technically, the Federal Reserve are a private entity that is oversought by the government. That's why. But
they're part of the
agency
Treasury,
that regulates their behavior is the Treasury.
No, they're not part of
Department.
Treasury.
Oh, they're not part of Treasury.
Correct.
Okay.
No. Well, but the guns at the Treasury are the ones that protect the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Cash. Okay.
Their special police are the ones. Anyway,
same way the Capitol Police protect DC.
Let's get back and let Mr. Arthur close.
Yeah, sorry. And like I said, it would take too long to explain, but these agencies have been given powers beyond the scope of their initial.
I'm not going to go over there and cut down any Christmas trees. I'm definitely not going to cut down any Christmas trees over there.
No. Just buy a fake one that spins. You're good.
Yes.
Don't forget the tinsel.
Yeah. Okay, we're going way off track. Let's hop back on and finish this up.
Don't stick around. They don't file stupid motions. They don't argue idiotic points. They want their case heard, or they admit they don't have a claim and they go home. But here's really the important thing that the Trump administration is doing, and this is as important as what's going on at the border. People aren't talking about it. Secretary Noem is requiring every alien in the United States to register. If you're here, illegally, you have to register with the foreign government, with the U.S. government. We know from, when we had a similar registration program after September 11th, that for every one person who was removed through that registration process, 10 will leave. So, when that goes into effect, a lot of people who, came to the United States who thought they had an invitation from Joe Biden are going to go. And that's especially true when, Tom Homan hits the streets, the agents hit the streets, and that's not going to be reflected. The president's critics are going to say, Obama deported more people. We could talk about that. There was a lot of book cooking there.
Turnarounds at the gate. That's not the same thing.
Exactly. But, the total illegal population is going to drop. It's probably going to drop by about 1 million people per year, in addition to the number of people who are physically removed from the United States.
So quickly, and I'm out of time, but in summary, cutting off benefits for illegal immigrants in this country, making illegal immigrants register with DHS, and making a public show of deportations, as we've seen with these videos of arrests on the streets and deportations. Those three things combined will actually pretty rapidly reduce the number of illegal immigrants in this country.
The left is going to lose their mind when people have to, in quotes, register. They are going to holler Nazis so fast. It's going to be, that's going to be crazy fast.
Yes, yes. As I said, let's start wrapping this up. Wow, that was actually really, really, really good. Really good. Really broke it down very well, obviously.
Yeah, he's only
It
got
is his
only got
job.
1 minute to finish cooking. Let's see what he's got.
Country
Yeah,
without
that's
us
not what
having
he
to
has
put
said.
people on a plane. They're just going to, well, self-deport. They'll go home on their own.
And I say that as a person who's got almost 34 years of experience in this field, who's seen every different kind of migration you can imagine.
Well, let's see if Congress has the will to back up those policies, as you said. Andrew Arthur, I cannot thank you enough, and Center for Immigration Studies.
Well, I can't thank Mr. O'Connor, Mr. Arthur, enough. All right, everybody.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely
subscribe,
fantastic.
ring the bell. Patrick thinks it's excellent. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, very, 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 very good now. Very,
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic.
I think it's a great episode. I think that a lot of information and a lot of facts. I hope this educates a lot of people.
Yes, yes, yes.
Amazing, guys. All right. Again, like, subscribe, ring the bell, do the thing, all that. Doubting Thomas, Patrick, as always, a pleasure. And I will catch you on the flip side soon. See ya.